I remember when we first launched the report, we were spending time around here visiting politicians in the Dáil, and I remember meeting one politician, I forget specifically who it was, but I remember what he said. He said, energy efficiency, great, healthy buildings, great, but if we don't get the houses built, we're going to go nowhere. And that's a real challenge, because politically, they know that if they don't build enough houses, the next generation are not going to, vote for them at the most simplest thing, but then people won't have a home. So you're really up against it. So it's very important that we have this report that's been sort of out there the last 2 or 3 years, giving us that opportunity to be able to sort of make sure it sits on the agenda. But it is a very difficult thing to get. I think what I'm saying is it's a political problem, and politicians generally can only work in quite sort of short 4 or 5 years ways forward, because yes, you might be building homes for today and the next decade, but what's the problem that you're going to have in 10 years time, 15 or 20 years time, either because the house is not up to a good physical standard, or because the occupants are having conditions. We heard earlier about an example, sort of an exemplar development in Ireland, which was built in the 1930s, and how fantastic it was. But now, because it's not being kept up to scratch, it's having problems, and that's the political challenge. Is really when the realpolitik, as they say, is that they need to build volume and they need to build quickly. They're going to start cutting corners in terms of quality. One example, if we can compare GB to Ireland, I think has actually been building houses better. It's been better at renovating. We heard earlier that Ireland, as a member of the EU, likes to be seen as the exemplar. But we're seeing requirements in Ireland to reduce or to speed up volume building, things like removing the dual aspects of apartment development, so you don't get the benefit of daylight or cross ventilation. And that's something the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland have been very vocal about, and the sort of impact of that, because it's done on volume. Similarly with adaptability, Irish houses are built in such a way that you can adapt them up the way, out the way. But again, the sort of political pressure is to say, that's too expensive, it's too slow. Make it faster. So you're sort of seeing towards what, to be fair, they've been doing, not as a badge of honour, but the way they've been building houses on mainland GB, kind of creeping over into Ireland, because they're sort of trying to push the volume. You can understand politically why, but as I say, it's really important that we keep there and saying, if you keep pushing and pushing, you're going to have consequences.
Yeah.
If you forget about the quality, by quality we mean design quality and physical build quality, and we're going to have problems down the line, and that's the real message we need to get home.
And I wrestle with this. I mean, I'm at a global level. I'm in countries where the access to better indoor environments is an economic problem to solve first and foremost. That people in abject poverty, the decisions about their long-term health and well-being are luxuries they don't get to afford to make decisions on, frankly. So, I'm a realist in that I understand that there are pragmatic decisions that have to be made around quality and performance when you're in a scenario that is, frankly, at an emergency level in a lot of countries. And Ireland, perhaps you could argue, is in one of those circumstances. I think you were talking about earlier about the increase in child homelessness.
Yes.
I mean, that's something that at a fundamental level should be abhorrent, right? And should be an absolute red line. So if that isn't a manifestation of a crisis, an emergency, you start making the argument, or we see the arguments creeping in, that any shelter is better than no shelter, right? That any home, whether it's got dual aspects or whether it's got the best ventilation system or the premium air quality, do we care? Like, we've got to get kids under roofs that they can be safe and secure and dry, and warm, at a very fundamental level. So I appreciate there's that balance there, and I don't know what the right answer is. Ultimately, they're political decisions that get made, at some level. But interestingly, there's another factor here, isn't there? And this was touched on today. There's also the commercial factor, the investment and the real estates and the people that build homes. This has to be a sustainable venture for them as well. And that comes into play, doesn't it? And particularly we see that, you mentioned the UK. The UK has felt that probably more abruptly than perhaps Ireland has, that a lot of the decisions that are made about the quality of homes or where homes are built are based on commercial reasons,
Absolutely, yeah.
Not on the need for communities in the right spot or the right type of homes.
And going back, you mentioned child homelessness, and it's, tragedy, in terms of the increase in child homelessness. Today we have 5,000 children homeless, in Ireland. So going back 10 years ago, you would be talking about less than 100. So it's gone from, a small, no number, is acceptable, but it's gone to a significant number. And when the focus is on shelter as opposed to a home, so the focus can be providing a shelter, but in terms of providing a home and a home as being part of society, so a child has a home, can develop and go to school, can partake, in society and develop, rather than having to put their lives on hold.
Yeah.
You mentioned, talk about, the political cycles. It is a huge issue, and something that was identified by the Housing Commission, and many others have identified it, is decisions are made on, political cycles rather than actually looking at the long term. So the Housing Commission report was saying, what do we need to do long term? One thing that the Housing Commission kind of, highlighted, again, many people know, is the lack of investment in infrastructure. Because if you're providing water infrastructure, if you're providing electricity, it takes 10, 15, 20 years to deliver something, of significance. But that's not, there's no interest, in that for a government that is only going to be in place for 5 years.
Yeah. And of course, all governments would argue that they're laying down plans for the next generation and all this kind of good stuff. But, the reality is that there are these cycles of political change. And we can see that sometimes they can be fairly meaningless. You get small changes in government, but you also get unbelievable changes in political will occurring. We've seen that in the United States, for example, where within the space of 6 months, you can see the basic tenements and principles of science and community turned on its head, literally. So I think by the grace of God, all of us go there. We're hanging by a thread politically often that just a change. And we've seen this, particularly in Europe, with the need for, arguably increased security, how quickly funds have been diverted to the political, to the military industrial complex.
Yes.
Right? How money was found,
yes,
like seemingly out of nowhere to address a problem, and understandably so, right? But you realise how quickly big political shifts can happen. Sometimes we're not just talking about subtle changes of energy performance building directives over what seems like decades, right? That sometimes this can move quickly. And one of the things we've seen, and this was what was happening this morning, was the European Commission coming under a lot of pressure going, energy performance of building directives, great, but there's an affordability crisis going on here at the same breath. Like, it's fine going down this energy performance route, and for good reason, but we've got to build homes and they've got to be affordable. And there's a gap here. And that's, I think, what they were trying to address today a little bit, wasn't it?
Yeah, in terms of healthy home events today, they were focusing on, we need to be looking at quality. That we can get too caught up with the immediate in terms of delivering, but if we don't look at the long term in terms of what the need for good air quality, good daylighting, good warmth in a home. One thing I think has happened maybe on the energy side over the last maybe 10, 20 years, in most countries, is we're focusing on insulation and air tightness, and the issue of ventilation has been very much secondary, and air quality been very much secondary in terms of to achieving that. And there's also even a lack of knowledge. Somebody said, can we do natural ventilation? Can we do mechanical ventilation? And what is the solution? What is the solution? So there's the biggest issue. There's a serious lack of understanding and knowledge of ventilation today compared to, say, going back, say, 20 years. So traditionally you're looking at having vents, wall vents. You're looking at windows and various windows you can open and leave open, small windows, big windows. But with the introduction of mechanical ventilation, and then trying to marry, permanent natural ventilation systems with mechanical, people have got confused.
I think that confusion point's a really interesting thing, and I think that's actually where there's a lot of lessons with the good comms that come out of organisations like Velux, because I think my sense of it is that we need to get back to basics somehow with housing and define what housing is for at a fundamental level, so that the world can shift around that core tenant. But at some level, everybody, from homeowners all the way through to the political system, understand what we're in this for. What's the point of a home? What's it supposed to deliver? And I think if you go out into the street below us here and straw poll 100 people, you'll get so many different results about what they think housing is for, from price increases to affordability to the number of homes to the fact that it should be secure to everybody will have different perspectives. But I think we've somehow lost at a fundamental level that the guiding principle of housing, and what that means is that these political pressures or these macroeconomical pressures that kind of come and go shifting that core pillar somehow, and people are getting confused about what we need to do, what a home should be, because we should instinctively be able to know that in a crisis where we've got an affordability problem and a supply problem, where the bottom line is when it comes to quality. Like we should know what, regardless of what homes we're building, what that home should look like at a fundamental level. And I don't know if you agree, but I just get this sense that, and I guess that's why Healthy Homes Ireland was kind of conceived, wasn't it? It was that somehow we need a central tenant to what a home should be that needs to be defined in broader terms than just an EPC rating or a building energy rating, that actually the definition of a good home is this.